The camera was running. The family was not watching. What it captured was something nobody would have looked for. Fenwick was a 3-year-old Bernese mountain dog, 91 pounds, black and white, and rust, the kind of dog that draws children across parks. He had been in their household since the year before Harlow arrived, a strategic timing on the part of his owners Claudia and Reed Nakamura, who believed, correctly, that establishing the dog first would simplify the addition of a child. Fenwick had been easy. He had adjusted to Harlow's arrival with the philosophical acceptance of an animal that had long since stopped requiring things to make sense. Harlow was 4 months old. She had been home from the NICU for 6 weeks. She had been born 3 weeks early, healthy, a brief precautionary stay, and had come home with clean records and a pediatrician's reassurance that the early arrival had resolved without consequence. She was feeding well. She was gaining weight on the expected curve. She was, by every measure the family could apply, fine. Reed had set up the nursery camera the week before, a consumer-grade thing, mostly for the novelty of watching the baby monitor footage during evenings. It sent a feed to his phone. He watched it occasionally, usually found Harlow asleep and Fenwick lying on the rug beside the crib, which he found funny. He had sent the screenshot to his mother twice. On Thursday, he opened the camera app at 7:15 p.m. while sitting in the kitchen. What he saw on the camera was Fenwick standing at the crib rail, both front paws up, muzzle over the side of the crib, nose pressed close to Harlow's face. Not touching, close. His body was rigid, not the relaxed posture of an animal looking over something with casual interest. The tension in his back and haunches was the kind of tension that comes from holding very still on purpose. Reed watched for about 12 seconds. Then he went to the nursery. Fenwick stepped back when Reed came in, immediately, the way he always did when an adult entered, not because he was trained to defer, but because he consistently did. Reed looked at Harlow. Harlow was sleeping. Her color was fine. Her breathing was fine. He listened. Fine. He went back to the kitchen. He looked at the camera app again. Fenwick had returned to the crib rail. Same position, same rigid stillness, muzzle over the rail close to Harlow's face. He called Claudia from the living room. She came and they both stood in the kitchen doorway looking at the phone, and Claudia said, "He's been up there before, right?" Reed said, "Not like that. If you stay for stories about what animals sense before we do, you're in the right place. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one." They went to the nursery together this time. Fenwick stepped back. Harlow was sleeping. Everything was fine. Claudia was a second-grade teacher. She had no medical training. Reed worked in logistics. He had no medical training. What they had was a camera and a dog, and the specific unease of two people who could not explain what they were looking at and could not dismiss it either. Claudia picked Harlow up. The baby's breathing, which had seemed fine when Reed was listening from standing height, sounded different at Claudia's shoulder. Slightly faster than usual. Slightly shallower. Claudia had been listening to Harlow breathe for 4 months with the attentiveness of a parent who has spent time in a NICU. She said, "Her breathing is fast." They called the pediatric after-hours line. The nurse asked 4 questions and said, "Go to the emergency room. Has your dog ever done something that made no sense until it was the only thing that made sense? Tell us in the comments. These stories deserve to be heard. The neonatologist at the Children's Hospital was Dr. Priya Subramaniam. She had spent 16 years in neonatal and pediatric medicine. She assessed Harlow within 6 minutes of their arrival and said the word RSV with the careful delivery of a physician who wants parents to understand severity without panic. She said Harlow's respiratory rate was elevated, her oxygen saturation had dropped to 93, and the infection had likely been developing for 4 to 5 days. She said, "In a 4-month-old with a NICU history, this needed to be caught when you caught it." Reed said, "The dog made us go." Dr. Subramaniam said, "How do you mean?" He explained the camera, the rigid posture, the muzzle over the side of the crib. He said, "He was there for at least an hour before we went in the second time." She said, RSV presents with detectable changes in the breath chemistry of an affected infant before the oxygen drop becomes visually apparent. The viral load changes the volatile compound profile of exhaled air. She said, "This has been documented in scent detection research." She said, "We got to her in time." What Fenwick had been doing at that crib rail for 60-plus minutes was monitoring a breath signature that had been shifting since before anyone in the family had noticed anything change. He had been reading the same information, the pulse oximeter would later confirm, through the only instrument he had. He had not barked. He had not alarmed. He had placed his body at the rail and stayed there, steadily, without drama, because the information said stay, and he had decided to believe it. Every guardian deserves to be recognized, even the ones who never asked for anything in return. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe so you never miss the next one. Harlow came home on a Saturday with a clean respiratory panel and a follow-up appointment the following Monday. Reed brought her in and set her in the bouncy chair in the living room. Fenwick came from the kitchen and stood at the edge of the chair and pressed his nose to her face once, brief, and then stepped back. His tail moved. He walked back to the kitchen. Reed stood in the living room with his phone in his hand. He opened the camera app. He was in the frame. So was the bouncy chair. So was Harlow, breathing normally. Fenwick was visible at the edge of the kitchen doorway, lying down, watching. The next story involves a dog who began pawing at a locked cabinet every morning for 2 weeks. And what was inside that changed everything. The camera was still running. Fenwick was still watching. Nothing about that had changed, and nothing now would need to.